Good morning, everyone. Today I'm doing our next sit talk in our series, um, and I'm covering Psalm 127 and Psalm 128, which I'm going to read to you. They're only short, and I thought it's important that we get that kind of the real sense of what the whole psalm is about. So, first of all, Psalm 127. Unless the Lord builds the house, its builders labour in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchmen stand guard in vain. In vain you rise early and stay up late, toiling for food to eat, for he grants sleep to those he loves. Sons are a heritage from the Lord, children a reward from him. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior are sons born in one's youth. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. They will not be put to shame when they contend with their enemies in the gate. Psalm 128. Blessed are all who fear the Lord, who walk in his ways. You'll eat the fruit of your labour. Blessings and prosperity will be yours. Your wife will be like a fruitful vine within your house. Your sons will be like olive shoots round your table. Thus is the man blessed who fears the Lord. May the Lord bless you from Zion all the days of your life. May you see the prosperity of Jerusalem, and may you live to see your children's children. Peace be upon Israel. This psalm, particularly Psalm 128, these two psalms, are a blessing from God. And Psalm 128 ends as a kind of pure blessing that you might say to someone. It kind of feels like the sort of thing that should be said at a wedding, and or when you leave someone. What a lovely way to leave someone, just saying, "May you live to see your children's children." You know, having a happy, a fruitful life. Peace be upon you. It just feels like the kind of thing, a kind of a really good goodbye. I want to start with Psalm 127. The observant among you will have noticed that up at church in the hallway we have the words from Psalm 127. Unless the Lord builds the house, its builders labour in vain. And that was put up when Rich and I were still leading the church. And the reason why we put it up in the hallway, it caused a little bit of a kind of discussion, a bit of debate, because it had been the village notice board. But Rich and I really felt strongly that we wanted to make a declaration to anyone who came in our church building and anyone who was using the post office that this is God's house and God's church, and that He is the one who's building it, and that unless we kind of offer it to God and ask God to take over our work, it's in vain, because it's God who grows it, it's God who builds it, it's God who is at work. And underneath, we have the picture of the house, and then underneath, the foundations of the house of God are love. And we felt really strongly that we wanted to make that kind of declaration to the village. And so I was reminded of that when I sat down to read this. Now, it says, unless the Lord builds a house, and then it talks about unless the Lord watches over the city. And so we've got these kind of two opposites. We've got home, which is kind of domestic and personal, and we've got city, which is apparently the original is to do with governance and power. And so we've got these two kind of balances of the personal and the kind of more governmental. And so in our church, we want God to rule in kind of the homeliness, the personal, the relationships, and we want God to rule and reign in its governance and its leadership. And that was why we wanted it right at the centre, right at the heart. But I've also been thinking about this verse in terms of my personal life. You know, I want my home and the way I raise my children and the way that I lead and the way that Rich and I lead as a family to our children in that very personal, very intimate kind of setting of our home. I want that to be built on a foundation of love and as God making that work and God doing it. And actually, the Bible's very clear. If it's not God, it's in vain. and that I'm building in vain, and it won't have that strong foundation. I have been very challenged by these verses, and where it says, "In vain you rise early and stay up late," because I think we all do that. We rise early, we stay up late, unless you're in a very unfortunate position and you get to stay in your bed for long hours of the day. Since the invention of the light bulb, which changed the way that we sleep, we all rise early, stay up late. And apparently, before the light bulb was invented, we would sleep on average for 11 hours a night. And now we only sleep on average between 7 to 8 hours a night. So it has changed the way we work. But God says it's in vain. Rising early, forcing my body to stay up late, is actually in vain. And that He grants sleep to those He loves. That actually rest is a God given gift from Him. And by forcing my body to stay up later and later to work, I'm not taking the rest. I'm not accepting the gift. This is a hugely countercultural message in our society. Busyness and being a really busy person is seen as kind of almost like a status symbol because it's showing kind of my importance. And I am completely uh, culpable of falling into this trap of thinking this way, particularly in my work life. Um, I don't know if you've done this, maybe it's just me, but I've fallen into the trap of noticing when what time people send emails. This is to do with work. I don't do this with your emails. If you send me an email, don't worry. But at work, I notice what time it is, and I feel smug, and it somehow ticks something in my self-esteem if I notice I'm sending emails later than them. When I first started teacher training, there were three of us training in one school, and we got on really well. And we had a really good kind of bantery relationship between the three of us. Uh, but when we were sort of first shown around the school, the kind of head teacher um, tapped the sign out sheet that staff had to sign when you left the school, and tapped it and said, "We do read that, you know." And it started this kind of ridiculous competition about which trainee would be the last to sign out when we left school. So we would literally compete to make sure that we were the last. If we could be kicked out by the caretaker when the caretaker locked up the school late at night, that was even better because we'd hope that the caretaker would make a comment about the fact they'd had to kick out their trainee. And so sometimes we'd all meet in the reception area where the sign out sheet lived, and we'd all sort of be reluctant. No, you go first. No, you go first. Or I'm just nipping to the toilet, so that our name would be the last on the list to sign out. And I think that is it says something about our society, that our society values those people at work who are working ridiculous hours. And although that's kind of a jokey example, there is a danger that we might fall into the trap of kind of proving our value through our work. And that is not kingdom. That's not a kind of kingdom mentality. One, it's really very unhealthy. But two, it's not the way that God wants us to live our lives. He grants sleep to those He loves. And that means I can kind of hang up my angst and worries about putting on this kind of perfect example of a busy person holding it all together, like with the children and the job. And our society puts such a high standard on what that's supposed to look like. This is probably more applicable to the women in the congregation. There's a pressure in our society to have the perfect home and for it to look clean and tidy, and to have well behaved, exemplary children who are sort of achieving ridiculous standards at age 5 and have a raft of qualifications coming out of their ears when they're still tiny. And also to be succeeding in your career. I may be talking more to the younger women here, but our society expects a level of perfection, particularly I think of women, that is unrealistic. And Jesus in particular doesn't sign up to this culture, which we're going to look at. And here it says it's in vain. My mum often says to me when I'm working a bit too hard, she says, Rachel, no one has ever said or has ever written on their tombstone, I wish I'd worked harder. And that's something that I try and remember. Apparently, my generation is known in sort of sociological circles as the burnout generation. Because burnout, when they first came up with the concept, psychiatrists, they came up with it thinking that it would be like high-level doctors and executives at top levels, at governmental levels, who would experience this burnout. And what they found instead is that burnout is becoming an increasingly common problem in people in their 20s, 30s, and 40s because we are getting up early and we are staying up late, and it's not, frankly, sustainable. We do not have to be perfect, and I take a lot of comfort from the story of Mary and Martha. They're both women. They both have. You see this from Martha. She has the kind of the same mentality of being the perfect host with the perfect house and providing the perfect meal. And yet, it's Mary that Jesus recognises. And I think that is a kind of release on women in our society, and maybe on men too, that we don't have to keep this perfect standard, that it's not kingdom, and that actually sitting at Jesus's feet and just listening and resting in his presence is more important than more and more work. Jesus spends his adult life, although he has a ministry, he spends the majority of his adult life working as a carpenter, not as a high-flying leader and minister, but as a carpenter. He starts his ministry with 40 days alone spent with his father in the desert. He only works in his kind of ministry that we know about for 3 years of his adult life. He spends time at urgent stress, like in a storm on a boat where you don't want to be, but the time of urgent stress, he's actually fast asleep. He goes off on his own on mountains when there are huge demands from people that follow him, and he constantly allows himself to be interrupted in his busy schedule. In Matthew 9, Jairus, who was a ruler in the city where they were, his daughter, Jairus' daughter, dies, and he comes rushing up to Jesus as you would, grief-stricken and seeking help from Jesus. And Jesus, in his own kind of unhurried, unbusy way, moves to go and heal Jairus' daughter. But he allows himself to be interrupted in going to help a ruler's daughter by the lowest in society. He allows an unclean, because she's bleeding, she's menstruating, so she'd been considered the lowest in society, and he allows that woman to interrupt him going to see a ruler. Now, I think that puts it into perspective. That is totally countercultural. He pauses the ruler, the person of importance, to spend time with the person who has interrupted him and who is considered lower in society. And I find that challenging. Now, the reason is if we go on to read the rest of Psalm 127 and into 128, it says, Sons are a heritage from the Lord, children a reward from him. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior are the sons born in one's youth. That's challenging to me because I can't always say that I see my children in this way. How often do I find myself talking about them in this way? I can be heavily critical of my children, and in fact, I find the Message version even more challenging, which says, Don't you see that children are God's best gift? Do I see my children as God's best gift when I'm stressed and hurried and rushing? I don't know that I always do. I do see them as God's best gift when they're asleep and looking all cute and calm and still in their beds. I see them as God's best gift when they're in a nice photo with a lovely background and their little cute smiling faces, maybe holding a flower or looking particularly joyful. Do I see them as God's best gift at 4 o'clock in the afternoon after a busy day? Do I see them as God's best gift when they're arguing, tearing each other's hair out? Do I see them as God's best gift on the school run? No, I really don't. So something needs to change in me. I've been reading this book and it's really changed something for me and I want to be different after reading it. I don't know that you always are you? You read a book and you really want it to change who you are, but it might not always do that. Anyway, it's called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer, and I would seriously recommend it. It talks about hurry being the most important enemy in our society today, and that hurry is a thief stealing our joy. And I think often I'm not seeing my children as God's best gift when I'm hurrying, which is most of the time. I'm a planner. I like to plan ahead. And so I set myself deadlines. And even if there's not really a deadline, I'm thinking I need to achieve this by this time. And in order for the day to be successful and peaceable, at this time I need to do this. At this time I need to do this. And it's going to be quite down to the minute. And that means that I'm often hurried and stressed to meet my own agenda, which I've set myself. When you're hurried and rushing and frantically busy to meet deadlines, whether they're real or imagined, it is impossible to be loving. And this is one of the things the points that he makes in the book. When you're rushing on the school run or to get to an event, it is impossible to be loving to your children or your spouse or your grandkids or someone who stops you in the street. It is impossible to be loving. And if love is to be the foundations, we need to do something about the rush and the hurry. One of the things it talks about in the message, in Psalm 128, it says, enjoy, sorry, I'll take it back a bit actually. It says, you work hard and deserve all you've got coming. Enjoy the blessing, revel in the goodness. If we work hard, there's supposed to be a time when we stop working hard and we're supposed to enjoy the blessing of having worked hard. And I love the phrase, revel in the goodness. Do I revel in the goodness? And what can I change about my life to make sure I'm not as rushed and hurried to ensure that I have time for reveling in that goodness? Now, obviously, I'm talking and thinking about my own situation. So a lot of what I said so far is about children and young children and feeling stressed about work. And I know that's not applicable to some of you. But there's things that we can all take, from this. When we have a sort of schedule in mind and we're going somewhere, do we allow ourselves to be interrupted by whoever it is that interrupts us? In my case, it will be children or my lovely husband, who I'm not very patient with if he interrupts me on a task, as he will tell you. So I found this a real challenge. What do I need to drop so that I have some energy for some reveling in my kids or my husband? Or for you, it might be your grandchildren or your grown up children or your neighbour or your friends. Do I allow interruptions to happen to my precious time? And when time's pressured, can I stop and show love to someone if they interrupt me? And also, if hurry is a thief of love and positive relationships in my household, how can I eliminate it? In lockdown, we've had this kind of slightly strange world, and in some ways it was very stressful for me. And in other ways, suddenly there are none of the things that make me my most rushed and hurried. There was no school run, which for us is a major opportunity for blowouts in this family. There were no clubs. There were no play dates. There were no days out. And that did mean that we were less hurried. And although being trapped in the house together was a bit of a melting pot at times of emotions, we were less rushed in various areas. And as we go back to normal life, my challenge is, and the challenge of this book I'm reading is, in what ways can I make some changes so that there is more time in our sort of lives as a family, less hurry, less rush? What changes can I make to ensure that there is time for reveling in the goodness and enjoying the blessing of rest, which is a gift from God? So I want to leave you with that challenge. What changes could you make so that you have some time for some reveling and some enjoying a bit of well-earned rest? You know, we don't need to be perfect. We're not called to be perfect. In fact, God asks us to be the opposite, to allow Him to work through our weaknesses. And that means that sometimes I have to allow myself to be weak. And so there are times when we need to say, this is too much and I need to value rest. And that's it, really. So I just wanted to finish, actually. This is how I was going to finish, by just reading the blessing over you, and really let it speak to you from the heart. This is Psalm 128 again. Blessed are all who fear the Lord, who walk in his ways. Thus is the man blessed who fears the Lord. May the Lord bless you from Zion all the days of your life. May you see the prosperity of Jerusalem, and may you live to see your children's children. Peace be upon you.